Hey, this is Finx MTG here. Hope you're having a wonderful day. And today I have another deck tech on a great card, Eluge the Shoreless Sea. This is a commander deck that reduces the spells, instants, and sorcery costs of your cards and lets you cast big, huge, amazing spells that you would normally have no chance to ever cast in a commander game. Usually you have to wait until a Universes Beyond card comes out to have a cool gameplay mechanic like this, but this one has it right here. Again, if you want to see the full deck list, check out my Mox field at Finx MTG, and you can see some of the maybe cards that are also on the sideboard for this as well. But the idea here for this particular style of the deck is, yes, we're going to cast big spells, and we're going to do some shenanigans to win the game with those big spells. The unique ability here is that he reduces the cost of your first instant or sorcery spell by 1 blue pip or 1 colorless for each land you control with a flood counter. And he floods your lands. So when he comes on the board, he floods your island. And then when he attacks, he floods an island. Or, which is another main theme of this deck, if he's blinked, which means he gets exiled and comes back to the battlefield, he triggers his enter the battlefield ability to, again, flood your island. So you have a ton of islands that are flooded and a huge cost reduction on your spells. So right off the bat, let's go into like how we win with this type of deck, right? He's also a large creature because he's as large as all of the islands you control. So to start off with, we have how we win right here. This is my main win condition with this version of the deck. It's called Enter the Infinite, a measly 12 mana sorcery card that basically lets you draw your whole deck, and then you put 1 card from your hand back onto the top of your deck. You don't care what card goes back on top because it doesn't matter. But the idea is that with this Eluge out, it's possible to cast this, maybe turn 6, turn 7, and you can actually get this card out and win the game with it, sometimes earlier if you go real crazy. And the way this wins, basically you have your whole hand in your deck, so your whole deck in your hand, you can do whatever you want. And you either have enough mana on the same turn to cast a Laboratory Maniac, or you wait for 1 turn cycle around and it comes back to you. If nobody's able to make you draw more than the 1 card on your library, which you would deck yourself and you would lose the game, which you have counterspells to stop, then you can cast your Laboratory Maniac, and anything that you can cast that would draw you a card will win you the game because of Laboratory Maniac's ability. So you win the game by having no cards in your library and being forced to draw. This is a more fair power level. I've put it at power level 7 because we're not doing a Thassa's Oracle combo, right? Like this is 12 mana plus 3 mana here for both cards to get your win con going. And you need to draw a card. There's a windows of opportunity for your opponents to interact. It's not as unfair as Thassa's Oracle, and I really prefer this one. And if it's not cEDH, we shouldn't be using Thassa's Oracle. So let's go through some of the other cards in this deck, right? So we need a way to get our win con. And you know what helps with that is a Mystical Tutor, because the Mystical Tutor can get an instant or sorcery card, reveal it, shuffle it, and put on top. So usually I save this card just to use for my Enter the Infinite to be able to go for the win condition. We also have a couple of other win conditions, such as attacking with Eluge as a giant creature that can do commander damage. And one of the ways to do that, as I go through the cards, we can see here, we have Beacon of Tomorrows. Target player takes an extra turn after this one. Shuffle Beacon of Tomorrows into its owner's library. So again, if you cast this, it goes back into your library. You can cast it again later. And the idea is that if you have a commander that's a 7/7, you only have to attack somebody 3 times and get through and be able to kill them. Now, in my games, there's ways to give your commander Island Walk, and you can flood an opponent's land, and that makes it an island as well as its other types of lands. But I haven't even needed to do that. I actually took out the cards that give Island Walk or Unblockable, and you can attack with your 7/7 and usually get in. And if you have extra turns, people are not ready for that, and you can get through. Another one we have is Time Stretch. So we are playing blue, right? So these are backup win conditions. It's not the primary ones. There are some infinite loops in here to do infinite turns. And basically on those infinite turns, you're just going to keep attacking with your commander into people until they die from commander damage. That's the backup win. Otherwise, it's just a great way to get extra spells cast in a turn. You get another turn, cast more stuff. but Time Stretch is amazing. Normally, you would never be able to play this card. Every time I've seen this in Commander, it's pretty much people are flipping into it with something and casting it for free or something like that. Nobody's ever casting Time Stretch for the mana cost that it costs. Anyway, we have Peregrine Drake here. This is great because when it enters the battlefield, it untaps up to 5 lands, and it also creates a combo with Archaeomancer here. So the idea is that if you have Archaeomancer, Peregrine Drake, and you have something like Time Stretch, and you have a way to blink items. I mean, there's a lot of different combos. You know what? I'm going to list them out over here. So we have Peregrine Drake, Archaeomancer, which can get back your extra turn spells. Or if this was in the graveyard, you can get back your Enter the Infinite win con. But there's also a card in here called Displace. You can blink your Archaeomancer, bring items back. You can blink your Peregrine Drake, make more or infinite mana different ways. There's just a couple of options there that we can go through as we run into the cards. But again, here we have some amazing ways to win. I'll put those there for everybody. One of the things that go well with that is a Conjurer's Closet. So if Conjurer's Closet is on the battlefield, at the beginning of your end step, that means every turn, you may exile target creature you control, then return that card to the battlefield under your control. It costs 5 mana. Say you have Peregrine Drake already on the battlefield. You put the Conjurer's Closet on the battlefield. Now you can go and you can blink the Peregrine Drake. You can also blink the Archaeomancer to get another spell back. And if you look closely, there's a different ways to loop these so that you can get infinite turns with that. There's also ways to get infinite mana, such as Deadeye Navigator and Peregrine Drake, right? They soul bond together, and then for only 2 mana, you can exile the creature, then return it to the battlefield under your control. So when you have a Peregrine Drake here, you can see when this comes in, you untap up to 5 lands. So you pay 2 mana, you tap all your lands, pay the other 2 mana to blink this one. When it comes back, you untap 5. So you just keep doing that, and you're netting 3 every time. And Displacer Kitten, which is Kitchen, he's in the kitchen maybe, I don't know. Displacer Kitten is great because anytime you cast a spell, and this deck is all about casting spells, you can blink another target, you can exile and bring it back to the battlefield. Again, that works with a bunch of these other options here as well. So if you want to go crazy with it, you can do different things, and it's also just good to generate extra mana. Or if you just want to keep blinking your commander, remember, every time you blink your commander, you're making your spells be reduced by an additional 1 blue or 1 colorless. So just the synergies for the blink really goes well here, and you'll see that as a theme as we go through the deck. Now, one item that I saw, most people when they play this card, they're like, oh, I can play 1 big spell on my turn. That's not really the best way that I saw that you could use this. The idea is you get something like a Leyline of Anticipation out, whether it's in your opening hand or you just cast it for the mana cost later. And this is amazing because this card discounts the first card you cast on each turn. So that means on each opponent's turn, if you have Leyline out, you may cast an instant or sorcery, and because you can cast sorceries as instants, that means you're casting all your spells on everybody else's turn. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4 times you can cast a spell that's discounted. So when you have these cards that give your other cards flash, that pretty much can get you to the win state that you need. It gets you so far ahead in the game. Another one that I use is Valley Floodcaller. Usually if I have either 2 of these in my hand at the start of the game, I will pretty much keep that hand and not mulligan further. This one I can cast non-creature spells as though they had flash. That includes items like Conjurer's Closet or something that you're trying to sneak out an artifact or something on somebody else's turn. So right there we have another great synergy, and you can see all the synergies already building up in this deck, right? So Eluge, as Eluge is traveling across the seas, the problem is that you do need a lot of mana to run this deck, and you need ways to get islands out of your deck. Blue is not known for its mana ramp. So we have, of course, a Soul Ring to start off because it's in every deck. A Solemn Simulacrum is a great card because you can get an island out of your deck, and the idea is that you can keep blinking this with cards like Displacer Kitten, and you keep getting that advantage again and again, and there's so many ways to do that, so it's a lot of fun. Displacer Kitten is probably the best because it's every time you cast a spell. And again, when this one dies, you draw a card. It's just a nice little feature. Scampering Surveyor. I don't see a lot of people playing this card, but it's actually the same as Solemn Simulacrum, except when it dies, you don't draw a card, but it can fetch a land. It can also have the blink synergy. Sapphire Medallion. Sometimes when your commander dies or it gets too expensive to cast, or it's just not out yet, you need a card like this to help discount your spells as you're ramping up. You still need to be able to cast some spells. And this one's great because if you have the card with Flash, right, that means on each of the turns, you can, even though you only have so much mana, you can use this on somebody else's turn when you need to, still hold mana up and then cast something else and it's still discounted. The idea is that if this was just like a talisman, you can only use it once on your turn. You only get a 1 mana out of it. This one can get multiple mana for each spell you're casting, and we're casting a lot of spells. Let's keep it moving here. Wayfarer's Bauble. This is a very slow ramp piece, but works perfectly in this deck. I also thought of cards like Navigation Orb, but they're not as quick as this one. Navigation Orb just brings it to your hand. We want actual ramp, putting it onto the battlefield. This works great for that. Scepter of Eternal Glory. There's also these weird little cards like this one that are amazing in monocolor decks. You see them in mono black, mono red, mono blue. And of course here we're going to have it because when we have 3 islands in play, we add 3 mana of any one color just with this card. So again, even if we don't have our commander, if he gets locked out for some reason, we can still cast those really big spells if we need to. Oh, this is the secret tech, right? So if you ever see this card in somebody's deck, you know why it's there. Extraplanar Lens allows you to tap your lands for double the mana. And the trick with this is that when you see somebody playing something like a snow-covered island, you usually know that they're going to be using Extraplanar Lens, because if I was using regular islands, this effect would work for my opponents as well. If I have snow-covered islands, usually nobody else is carrying those, so it only doubles the mana production on my lands and not everybody else's islands. So that's a little feature that you have to do. You don't have to do that, but it gives you a little bit extra oomph when you do it that way. A great card to double your mana production from your lands. Throne of Eldraine. I thought this was another amazing card when it came out, but it's only good in monocolor decks, really, right? So 5 mana, enters the battlefield, you choose blue, add 4 mana of blue to your mana pool, which is amazing. And it's everything we have is monocolored, so it's good right there. You can tap it for 4 mana. That's huge. You can also blink that with Displacer Kitten, and you can tap it again, which is huge there again. You know what? If anybody sees Displacer Kitten on the board, they're just going to kill him because he's too scared. The other thing is 3 tap, draw 2 cards. Sometimes you need to get some card draw going in this because you're struggling a bit or you burned all your resources. And that is a huge ability to do that because the drawback here doesn't matter because we're in monocolored. Then we got some interesting tech here, right? I don't even know how to say that, but it's Mitotic Manipulation. Mitotic Manipulation sounds better. 3 mana. Look at the top 7 cards of your library. You may put one of those cards onto the battlefield if it has the same name as a permanent on the battlefield. The idea being that you have a snow-covered island on the board. You look at the top 7. There's a snow-covered island. You put that on the board. It is not coming in tapped, so you can still tap it and use it that turn if you need to. Retraced Image. Reveal a card in your hand, then put that card into play if it has the same name as a permanent in play. Basically the same concept of the previous card to put a snow-covered island into play. Ooh, and then we have High Tide. This is a nice Fallen Empires version. Until end of turn, all islands produce an additional 1 blue when tapped for mana. Keep in mind, if an opponent has 1 blue island untapped and you cast this spell, it affects the production of their land so they can counterspell it potentially, or potentially your next spell that you're going to cast. But it's a great way to double up your mana for 1 turn for a big play. And I love these cards as well in this deck, a Terrain Generator. Again, we're kind of going slow here, right? We're playing our commander, we're flooding our lands. We're not really being very aggressive. We're not doing a lot proactively. This is more like we're sitting back, we're trying to set up, which does take some time, granted, and that's why this is not going to be the highest power level. But at the same time, we're not going to be the biggest threat on board usually. So people are dealing with other threats on the board as we build, and then we get Terrain Generator going, putting basic lands from our hand into play tapped. And because we have a lot of instants and flash enablers, we don't have to play stuff on our turn, so we can wait until the last moment to use this on the player before ours turn, and then put your land out if you didn't need to counter something that turn. Another great card that come out recently, Horizon of Progress. So again, it can add blue if you need it. You can put a land from your hand onto the battlefield tapped, which is pretty amazing there. And in a pinch, you can sacrifice it to draw a card. So it's the same kind of concept as Terrain Generator there. So there you see, we have a lot. Oh my gosh, 13. There's 13 cards here that are all about land ramp. And you definitely need at least one of these, if not two of these, in your opening hand to really get going with this deck. Put those over there. And you want to keep refilling your hand. So we have cards that normally you can't cast because they cost 7 mana, right? So 7 mana, draw 7 cards. This one's a little scary because it targets a player, so somebody can redirect this to somebody else. So keep in mind, if there's a red player, sometimes they have the card, like a deflecting SWAT type of card that can redirect it. But when discounted, you pay 4 mana and you end up drawing 7 cards. Is pretty amazing. Seagate Restoration. This is a perfect card for this deck. It flips into a land where you pay 3 life and it can come in untapped. Or you draw cards equal to the number of cards in your hand plus 1. You have no maximum hand size for the rest of the game, which is very important because we need to build up a reserve in our hand to be able to deal with threats. So it's great if we can have more than 7 cards in hand. Archmage Emeritus. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, draw a card. When I get this on the board, a lot of people don't like it because they know that in a deck that's a spell slinger type of deck, this can do a lot of work. Again, every time you're casting something, you're replacing it. Great way to draw cards. Then we have something that I don't think a lot of people use. Lord of Change. Flying, ward 3, so he's hard to target. Again, we don't get this discounted by our commander. It's only the instants and sorceries that get discounted. But still, this one does a lot of work because when it enters the battlefield, you draw 3 cards. We can flicker him with Displacer Kitten, with Conjurer's Closet, Deadeye Navigator, anything you want to flicker him with. And every time he comes back in, you draw 3 cards. It's also a 6/6 flying, so you can attack with this and get some damage in there for a win if you're trying to get that last bit of damage to get somebody knocked out. Jin Gitaxis. There's a couple of versions of Jin Gitaxis. This one just works really well. The synergies with this deck is amazing. 5 mana, it's a 5/5 with ward 2. Already decent there. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell with mana value 3 or greater, draw a card. So anytime we cast any of our big fun spells, which is the point of our commander discounting them, we get to draw another card, so it replaces it. But this one, we actually have to take this one apart here and flip it because this has a really good flip ability, right? So when we put it on this side, you have draw cards equal to the number of cards in your hand. You have no maximum hand size for as long as you control the Great Synthesis. Return all non-Phyrexian creatures to their owner's hands. This is a big effect that you'll see some more of in the deck. It's blue, right? So we need a way to deal with other people's board states. This is a great way to return all of the creatures that are there that would be taking you out to their hands. And then the last one, you may cast any number of spells from your hand without paying their mana cost. And then you exile this and return it, and it returns as the other side back as the creature again, right? So again, if you get to that last one, you can play whatever the largest spells that you had in your hand that you were drawing into, even with this card drawing into. Pretty amazing right there. Now again, to flip it, you can activate it only as a sorcery and only if you have 7 or more cards in hand. But that's great because you want that last ability on this when you already have a full hand anyway. So we have Jin Gitaxis. Next up, we have the traditional Mystic Remora. If you wanted to get fancy, you could throw in the Rhystic Study as well. I don't have it at that power level. I think this one's a lot more fair and not as annoying. This one, it costs 4 mana for them. They can never pay it, basically. And also, this dies after a while. Like, you don't just leave it around forever. Wavebreak Hippocamp. I love this card. Whenever you cast your first spell during each opponent's turn, draw a card. Our idea is that we play as many flash spells as we can, so every time we do, we draw a card. And you see how there's a lot of card draw in here that can get you to refill your hand. And then we have the amazing Blue Sun Zenith. Now, there's a million versions of cards that are 2 blue or 2 colorless, 1 blue, and X. It's always like the X spells to draw a certain amount of cards. You'll see which ones I have in here. I have this one because you draw that many cards. You can also target an opponent to deck them if you have infinite mana, which is possible with some of our stuff here. And when it resolves, you shuffle it back into your library, and you can do it again at a later part of the game if you need to. A lot of fun there. But this one, I think every time I've cast this, I've won the game. Finale of Revelation is amazing. You draw X cards if X is 10 or more. Instead, shuffle your graveyard into your library. Draw X cards, untap up to 5 lands, and you have no maximum hand size for the rest of the game. All of those parts are very valid. Remember, it exiles if you do resolve that. One drawback being that it is a sorcery, right? This one we wanted in here because it was an instant. We do want it on an opponent's end step before our turn. But that drawback for the sorcery on this is worth it for the amazing benefits of this card. Mnemonic Deluge. I had a couple cards like this. This one I found very fun, and it ended up getting the best cards. There's a couple other ones that give you some of your own cards here. But exile target instant or sorcery card from a graveyard. Not just yours, but any graveyard, right? You may cast the copies of it. You get 3 copies. You cast those copies without paying their mana cost. So you can exile something that is somebody's graveyard that is part of their combo piece, and they need it. Or you can cast something that is just an amazing instant or sorcery, and you get 3 versions of that. So it's a lot of fun here. Yes, normally you could never pay that amount of mana, but in this deck it's just fun. Brain Surge. Brain Surge is great because after we put Laboratory Maniac on the battlefield, we still need a way to draw some cards. So one of the ways, if you're not just waiting until your draw step, you would play Brain Surge so that on your turn you would get the win. And if not, you can always just cast this just for the ability to draw some more cards when you need it. All right, and there we go. We have a bunch of card draw that acts in the deck. So all this is going on. It's a lot of fun and all, but we also have to stop our opponents from winning, which is tough, right? We don't have a lot of items on the board that can do that, so we have to operate through counter spells. Now we have counter spells in here that just work well in certain situations to give you card advantage, and then we have when you need to stop somebody from winning the game. This one counters a spell. You may cast a non-land card in your hand that shares a card type with that spell without paying its mana cost. So let's say somebody casts a sorcery. You can counter it, and you can cast the time stretch that was in your hand. Take 2 turns after that existing player. So this can skip turn order. Keep that in mind when you take an extra turn after the existing one. So you can cast something like that. You can cast your Enter the Infinite way before you would ever have the normal amount of mana required to do that. Whole bunch of stuff there. Or if you had to, it's just to counter a spell. Again, this is going to be discounted at least 3 or 4 from Eluge. Spelljack. Counter the spell. If it's countered this way, you remove it from the game instead of putting it into its owner's graveyard. And while it's removed, you can play the card as though it were in your hand without paying its mana cost. A great way to spelljack to steal a card. Archmage's Charm. This is your typical mono blue counterspell that's in a lot of mono blue decks. Choose one counterspell, or target player draws 2 cards, which I've used, or gain control of target non-land permanent with converted mana cost 1 or less. And the great thing about this last ability, keep in mind that's 1 or less. That can steal somebody's Soul Ring. It can steal somebody's Shadow Spear. It can steal a 0 mana cost Mox Amber, which can work with your commander. So there's a lot of stuff you can do with it. And stealing a Soul Ring from somebody really sets them back and puts you pretty far ahead. So sometimes you'll need to do that if somebody starts getting ahead or looks like they're going to get a big jump on the game, or your ever faithful counterspell. Desertion. Counter target spell. If an artifact or creature spell is countered this way, put that card onto the battlefield under your control, and this is the important part, instead of into its owner's graveyard. 5 mana, we don't care about the mana because we're discounting spells. So what you do is somebody tries to cast their commander like Eluge, right? You cast Desertion to counter that spell. Because it's not actually going to the graveyard, state-based actions aren't checked, and it can never go back to the command zone. So you can actually steal somebody else's commander until they have some way to remove it from the board. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but that's how I saw the rules going with this one. So pretty incredible, even if you just want to steal a Toxrill from somebody that they're casting as well to get one of the best creatures in the game. Sublime Epiphany. This actually works really well in decks where I can't even discount the cost. Pretty much every time I've cast it, it's just done a good job, right? So you usually hold on to this, and then when somebody does something you don't like, you counter that spell. Or you can, if somebody's playing cheapo and they have a Thassa's Oracle, you can counter the triggered ability from that. You can return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand, which is big. Sometimes in this deck, there's certain things that you'll have to remove or stack pieces off the board to be able to continue. You can create a token that's a copy of target creature you can control, and then you can draw a card. So again, you're choosing one or more. You can choose all of these if you want. And the idea is that you can still copy your commander. Granted, the legendary rule would kick in and you'll sacrifice the copy. Make sure you sacrifice the copy and not the original. But you still get to enter the battlefield's effect of flooding another land. I pretty much flood most of my lands for the game here. Counterspell right here, this is lower power. If it was higher power, it would be a mana drain, but this one looks cool, so I like this one. Cryptic Command. This is a Rockstar in other formats, but here we have one that's a little bit difficult in non-mono blue because it's got 3 blue pips. Here we don't care about that. Again, choose 2 options this time. Counter target spell, return a permanent, tap all creatures your opponents control, which can save you when somebody's going to swing in with all of their 2/2 tokens that are getting pumped. And you could also draw a card maybe. Unwind. This is a nice little trick card where, say you have 3 mana, right? If you tap the 3 mana, somebody casts a spell you don't like, you tap the 3 mana, you can play this discounted for hopefully 3 with your commander, and then you have another 3 mana that untaps because this untaps the land. So the next spell that they play that turn, you could either try and counter that if it's in the same phase, or you can try and cast one of your big 6 mana spells that you wouldn't normally be able to cast because you didn't have enough lands to do it or something like that. Like just a bunch of little tricks that you can do with it. Again, this comes in big. You'll see it when the play lines are happening, when you're playing stuff at flash speed and it's going from player to player and you have to react on other people's turns. And it's kind of fun when it presents those opportunities. Commandeer. Oh, keep in mind, if you untap the lands and you have High Tide or Mana Flare, Extraplanar Lens, I'm sorry, that one out. This also does extra work. Commandeer. We're stealing somebody's spell for 7 mana, or we're exiling 2 blue cards from our hand instead of paying the mana cost of 7. And it's a non-creature spell, which did mess me up once, and I missed that and it lost me a game. But anyway, you can either gain control of it, if it's a creature, put it onto the battlefield under your control. Or if it's a spell, you can choose new targets and all that. So it's a great way to really stop somebody from doing something big. And if you have these cards that draw you your whole deck, or they draw you your seven cards, or an X spell where you drew a lot, that card works very well. We also have some protection here. This card has been doing a lot of work in all the decks I've been putting in a lot of decks now. But Reality Ripple can be used defensively, it can be used offensively, or it could just be used because you want to show somebody a Mirage card, right? So target artifact or creature or land phases out. So if somebody targets my commander with something, I will cast Reality Ripple on it. It phases out, which means it acts as if it doesn't exist. They usually represented that by flipping over the card, and it doesn't re-exist. It doesn't come back into existence until my untap step. So on the untap step is when it comes back. And again, that's before your upkeep, which is also nice. So you can use it like that. It can save this guy from a board wipe because, again, it's phased out until your turn again. You can use that on an opponent who has a Yawgmoth combo that they're trying to do. You can phase out the key part of the combo and they won't get it until their next turn. It's a lot of fun stuff that you can do with that. And it's also great that it hits artifact, creature, or land. Wizards of Thay, Myriad. So this one's a lot of fun because it does the same thing as your commander. Instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Again, it's not the 1 blue pip because that doesn't exist anywhere else yet in Magic besides this card. But you may cast sorcery spells as though they had flash. So this card does everything we want on a card for this type of deck. The Myriad means when you attack a single opponent, so if I attack that way, it makes 2 copies attacking my other opponents. And that means that instant spells that I can cast during that attack step are discounted 3 because I have 3 of them. So that's pretty cool there. Panharmonicon. This is great with all of those enter the battlefield effects that we've been seeing here, including the commander one, and also working with cards like Displacer Kitten here, which do make the good work happen. Spellseeker, oh man, all-star of the deck right here. Spellseeker is great because it can tutor for your mystical tutor, that is for your win cons. It can target a lot of spells in here, like the X spells, like the finale of Revelation is 2 blue X. So you can actually tutor it up with this because X is equals 0. There's actually 10 targets for the Spellseeker in the deck. So if you are displacer kitting and blinking this card, you can keep tutoring every turn. I've had a situation where I had the Conjurer's Closet out, and again, just every turn tutoring for another card. There's removal, there's card draw, there's what you need, there's a tutor, you know, I mean, it's just a great way to work. Okay, get excited about that one, but let's put that one down over there. And we have some of the cards here that are for removal and dealing with the opponent's board states, right? Because that is a weakness of the deck. Sometimes you only have out your commander. You're going to get attacked if somebody has a swarm of creatures. We have Rapid Hybridization, Pongify. These are just your traditional blue cards that can deal with a creature. Scourge of Fleets, a lot of fun. Again, we have land ramp in the deck. So we're going to get up to 7 mana before other players are. This returns basically all of the other creatures with toughness less than the number of islands you control. X or less, so it's equal to or less than the number of islands you control. So basically returns every other creature on the board to their hands, and that's what you're doing. You're slowing them down so that they can't kill you before you can do your combo and win. Oblivion Stone. We needed to go out of blue to be able to deal with everything. So there's another card called Perilous Vault, which is 5 mana, or I think it's 4 mana and 5 mana tap. It exiles all permanents. If you want that one for exile, depending on your meta, you can use that as well. I like this one because it's cheaper, and you can also put a fate counter on your commander, and then the turn after, pay 5, sacrifice it, and destroy all non-land permanents, leaving your commander. So if you get this one out early, you can start putting fate counters on your permanents, and if it's not destroyed, then you can eventually do a board wipe, but it saves some of your cards. Flood of Tears. This is effectively the poor man's Cyclonic Rift, right? We're not going too crazy with it, but I really like this card. It's 6 mana, discounted in this deck. Return all non-land permanents to their owner's hands. That includes all of their mana rocks and everything. It takes a while to build up when you have 3 mana rocks out and all your creatures and your commander, and it all goes back to your hand, and then you're going to have to discard most of them on your turn because you can't cast that many spells. And the great thing with this is that when you return Eluge to your hand, you can usually use the second ability here if you return 4 or more non-token permanents to recast your commander. It doesn't even recast. You put it back onto the battlefield, which is a great way to do it. Blatant Thievery. 7 mana. For each opponent, gain control of target permanent that player controls. That includes commanders. So whatever is going to hinder their deck the most, you can get, or what's going to get you to your win con, or what's going to be enabling you to kill an opponent. This is a great card that you can never play in most decks. Actually, both of these. Agent of Treachery, I like this card. It's hard to actually get it going. Like the idea is that you blink this several times, then you gain control of 3 or more permanents, and then on your end step you draw 3 cards. Wouldn't that be amazing? Like when you get that off, I don't know if I have actually done that. It usually gets targeted before then, but it's a lot of fun to try, right? It's about the journey. Devastation Tide. 5 mana, return all non-land permanents to their owner's hand. The miracle cost, though, is great because sometimes you're getting behind and you're like, I'm top decking here, I'm going to die if I don't have anything. And you draw this off the top of the deck. Oh, 2 mana, I play this at instant speed, and you return all the permanents to hand. And you have another chance to come back. Aether Sprouts for 5 mana. This is when somebody has non-token creatures and they really want to attack you. For each attacking creature, its owner puts it on the top or bottom of their library. Some people like their creatures too much, and they end up trying to put the cards on the top of their library. I don't think they played against a card like Plow Under back in the day, but when you do that, that means that you're not getting your new draws, right? So if you put a bunch of cards on top of your library, that means that you're playing the same game that you played before. Everybody knows what you had. So the idea is that they should put it on the bottom of their library, but it gets rid of them, and it doesn't put them in their graveyard, and it doesn't put them in their hand. So it takes a while for them to get things back. Sometimes when you just put stuff into the graveyard, somebody can reanimate or do something crazy, and it didn't really help enough just to put it in the graveyard. Then we have our blink spells. Check out Displace here. For 3 mana, exile not 1, but 2 target creatures you control, then return them to the battlefield under their owner's control. What's the best blink spell is actually Ephemerate, but we don't have that because it's white. So we have cards like Displace, we have Essence Flux, exile it, then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. If it's a spirit, put a +1/+1 counter on it. So we have that one here, also making your guy stronger. Then we have Teferi's Time Twist. Exile target permanent you control, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. And as you can see, I'm putting ones in here that are good in different scenarios, not just every exile one, right? So this is good if there's a board wipe because it makes the Eluge come back on your end step. So you get around a board wipe, which would normally be hard to do. Planar Incision. Exile target artifact or creature, then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control with a +1/+1 counter on it. Again, we do not have a Homeward Path land in this deck. So if somebody steals our commander, you know, we start crying, and then we cry until we draw a card like Planar Incision, and then we can exile it and get it back. Otherwise, it's a little bit difficult. You need to do like a board wipe that returns them to the hand, but you have to be on the watch for somebody stealing your Eluge. Blur. Exile target creature you control, then return it, draw a card. This one exiles 2 cards, and you draw a card. Quantum Misalignment. I really like this card. I feel like it's overlooked. But you create a token that's a copy of target creature you control, except it isn't legendary, for 5 mana. Again, if Eluge is 4 mana, we're already going to have Eluge out, probably have ramps, so it would come out on turn 3 or something like that. And then cast this Quantum Misalignment, copy him, flood a land, you know, attack with them. Next upkeep, it has Rebound, which means it's an exile and you can cast it again. So you get another one. Man, I lost count already. How many flood counters is that? And that's on turn like 5, right? 5 or 6. Sink into Stupor. This is a Modern Horizons 3 card that should be in every blue deck. It's a flip land where the other side of it, you have to pay 3 life, and then you're good to go as an untapped land that can produce blue mana. But sometimes we just need to return something to an opponent's hand, and this comes in handy for that. This can also save some of our creatures because it can redirect the target from an instant or sorcery spell with a single target to this guy. So if it's a kill spell, trying to hit Eluge, redirect it to this. Otherwise, it's a flip land where you pay 3 life, comes in untapped. And there you have the, look at all of those cards that can do the exiles, you know, like copy your commanders. A lot of fun stuff you can do there. And again, you can use those on your Agents of Treacheries, on your Peregrine Drake, your Archaeomancer. We have some lands as well here. Let's go through this quickly. Cephalid Coliseum. Again, if you have 7 or more cards in your graveyard, you can also cast a card like this to draw to trigger your Laboratory Maniac, where this card is, so that when you need to draw to win the game, you got that synergy right there. And Mystic Sanctuary, putting one of your instant or sorcery cards from your graveyard on top of your library, a way to get recursion. Castle Vantress, because we want to scry too. Now keep in mind, guys, when you're flooding, flood all of your non-basic lands first, because your islands are already islands, but when you flood these, it makes them into islands. So there you go. And then they can tap for blue mana. So even something that can only tap for colorless can tap for blue with that effect. This enters tapped, pay 2 life, add 1 colorless, but if you spend it on an instant or sorcery, that spell can't be countered. If you're running into a blue deck, we have limited win cons here, so that's why I have this here, and I just like the art from Lord of the Rings because it looks cool. Ghost Quarter is the budget strip mine for the deck. Could also do Field of Ruin. This one is really if they have some kind of combo or something, a Glacial Fortress, some kind of weird stuff that's going to like get really far ahead or win the game, you need some kind of land destruction. And then we're going into, oh man, look at all these snow-covered islands, right? We don't have that many non-basic lands, but we do have a lot of these snow-covered islands here. As you can see, the Kaldheim variant on this one in particular. Or you could go back to, you know, Ice Age if you want to get crazy. A little bit more expensive there. Now, this is the overall deck, right? There's many ways to build this deck. I would say if you're doing it, try and do the flash mechanic. There's other ways you can do flash, but man, does it feel good when you have every turn a discounted spell. That is what makes this deck so much fun. The win cons, there's other win cons out there that you can use. You can also make your giant beater here, just beat people down as a Voltron deck if you want. I'd advise against going into stuff like, this is not in the deck, right? This is Harbinger of the Seas. This is Harbinger of the Seas. So these stacks pieces, if you just want to be a jerk, you play these cards, but it makes it so that nobody else wants to play with you anymore because basically nobody else can play the game. Non-basic lands or islands. I mean, you could play this card, back to basics, all these stack pieces. That changes this deck from being something that's fun and interesting for everybody into just a chore and a pain. So I would say go with these processes here that are more fun. You have to really think about how you can get to your win con. You have to work with the resources you have and react to the table to be able to get a win, and you have to earn the win with this. Now, when it's not a level 6, because once you use Enter the Infinite and you draw so many cards, you have this many counter spells in your hand, right? So usually I'll have like 3 left. Somebody would have to effectively go through 2 or 3 counter spells when it goes around the table before it gets to my turn again to be able to stop me from winning. So it does give them a window, and you can see them working together and you're trying to do it. And sometimes it works for them and sometimes it doesn't. And that's what makes it interesting. But again, guys, this is the Eluge, the Shoreless Sea Commander Deck. A lot of fun showing you guys. Hope you have an awesome day. Enjoy.